How we doing, everyone? My name is Will Holdren. I am the host of the Will Power Podcast. Today we have an incredible entrepreneur on our podcast, and his name is Erik Weir. And Erik is the author of a bestseller book called Who is Eating Your Pie? On top of that, he started out his career back in investment banking. And in fact, he started out with a stutter, which is pretty remarkable because nowadays he's one of the most well-known public speakers, motivational speakers that is out there. In fact, I got a chance to see him at a conference not too long ago, and he had an excellent speech. And he is also the founder of a company called Weir Capital Management, and he has business interests in companies such as like Topgolf. He's in real estate. He does stuff in media and film as well. So he's all over the place, but just an incredible person, incredible entrepreneur. So with that being said, Erik, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me on. Well, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Like I said, I got to hear you speak before, and I love your story. I love kind of your delivery, and it's just amazing, to see how you can just inspire people, motivate people just by giving a speech. But starting out, I want to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests, which is one, what makes you and take time in your busy day to hop on podcasts like these to go out there and just share your story?
That is a great question. So I got my stutter from a car wreck, and I'll tell you a quick story and then why I do what I do today. I was in a car wreck, and I remember being spun around as a kid and ended up on the floorboard and seeing a woman come by on a gurney. She ended up being fine, but it was very traumatic for me. And as a kid, I watched Bugs Bunny Roadrunner, and the cars would crash and they would always explode, right? So everything was bad. So I'm like, I'm going to explode. I was 5 years old, and the police officer said, stay in the car. And I'm thinking, why would I stay in a car that's about to explode? And my mom said, stay in the car, Eric, it'll be safer. And then I have an older brother. What the older brothers do is like, we're going to die. We're going to
Right.
explode. They're like,
Yeah.
but that isn't what gave me the stutter. What gave me the stutter was I banged my head around and I had a brain injury. And they didn't diagnose that at that time. They just thought I just had some kind of stutter brought on by trauma or fear. And so what happened, it was very hard for me to speak. And I went to a speech therapist class. And they said, Eric, this is 1972, right? And they said, life is going to be hard. And the odds are you're going to be a failure because you're not going to want to speak. You're not going to want to talk to people. You're going to want to be reclusive. And in such, you'll miss a lot of opportunity and you probably never fully, develop a lot of relationships. Like, wow, that seems pretty harsh. She goes, however, and then she reframed it. That's what I talk about in my book is reframing problems. However, if you look at it like every conversation is a challenge, every conversation is an opportunity. Then by the time you're 18, you'll have overcome more obstacles than most people do in a lifetime. And you'll be virtually unstoppable because once you set your mind to something, you'll stick with it. And she was right. And I listened to somebody named Zig Ziglar, who he had a saying goes, you need to check up from the neck up, and talked about, goals and he wrote a book called See You at the Top. And for me, he had so inspired me that I wanted to use my ability to speak and to motivate to give back. So for the last 5 or 6 years, maybe 15, I've done a little bit. The last 5 or 6 more, the last two, maybe more still, where nothing inspires me more than to see an entrepreneur have the lights turn on, to reimagine their obstacles as opportunities, and to realize that the only limits they face are really limits they set for themselves.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely a very remarkable mindset. I was going to say it sounds very doom and gloom for your doctor to say you're never going to be successful. But then obviously she turned it around into a positive thing called referring to your
it
problem.
was it was a lot. It was a lot. My parents tell me. I dedicate my book to my mom and dad for never letting me, not even for one day, have self pity or remorse or this shouldn't have happened. And they were like, just be grateful. Everything happens for a reason. And I didn't see that. At age 40, at a church service, the pastor said, Eric, be grateful, not Eric, but the whole group. The Apostle Paul, and two times he had, we don't know what it was, but it's called a thorn in the flesh, where it was something that bothered him. He wanted to get rid of bad knee, bad back, some issue. And God said to him, my grace is sufficient. And I'm like, wow. And then at church service, they said, thank God for, what besets you. And I thank God for my stutter. And said, God, thank you for my stutter it made me who I am. It gave me the resolve and persistence that I now have today. And over 2 years, it wasn't the next day, but the stutter went away and I don't have it anymore. What big change for me was gratitude.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. Like you said, now it's completely gone. I mean, And you're an incredible speaker. Like I said, I heard you at the Create conference, and it was just yeah, it was very powerful stuff. So I'm glad you're
Great,
able.
thank you.
Yeah, and just what you're talking about, I think all the setbacks, it helps create part of your story. You know what I mean? And that the stutter helps create who you are, and other entrepreneurs, no matter what they're going through in their business, helps create who they are at the end of the day.
Yeah, and if you look back and think, all the things you learn from success, it's small. What you learn are from setbacks and the struggle. And I tell people that the success is the journey, it's not the destination.
Yeah. Yep. And to me, I think that's one of the biggest realizations too that I've had is just enjoying the time because the goals are always going to be changing. When you hit a goal, another goal is going to pop up, and you keep chasing them, keep chasing them, keep chasing them. So, like you said, you gotta enjoy that journey. And your journey is super fascinating to me because you're not someone who just started out directly in entrepreneurship. You, in fact, started out in the finance world, in investment banking. So, kind of walk me through what that was like, and how long were you in that realm before you actually branched out and started to do your own thing?
I was there for between 9 and 10 years. So I started with a company locally, Merrill Lynch, and was interesting is I had a stutter at that time, and there was a pool, and the manager at that time became a friend. I have a lot of respect for him, but he would fire people on like the third Thursday of the month, right? And Merrill had quartiles: first, second, third, fourth, fifth quartile. Fifth means your bottom 20%, fourth's bottom 40%. And I wasn't very good because I cold called 400, 500, 600 times a day. But when you stutter and you're with Merrill Lynch, M's are hard to say. It's hard to say my own name, Erik Weir. E's are hard, W's are hard. So it'd be something like, "Hi, I'm Erik Weir, but Merrill Lynch. How can I earn your investment business?" And most of the time, I wouldn't get through that. It would have me hung up on. And
Yeah.
occasionally, they would listen through, and then for whatever reason, I just never really got off the ground. And I would work twice as hard. I'd start calling at 8 a.m. Then I would, call 8 to 10, then 10:15 to noon, take a 15-minute lunch at my desk, and then till 2:15, take a 15-minute break, then till 5. Then I would leave, work out, come back, call from 7 to 8:30. And it was terrible. But one day I lost my voice, and I'm like, golly, I can't, I've got it. I mean, I'm going to get fired here. And there was a pool of like $100, and I was the next guy out, right?
Yeah.
Or it was coming. So I went across the street to the Piedmont Office Park on Piedmont Road in Atlanta, Georgia. This big complex. I started going door to door. And the first guy I came to, I knocked on the door and I opened up. I'm here weird with blah, blah, blah. He goes, come on in. And he goes, sit down, relax. He just thought I was nervous is why I stuttered, not that I had like a full on speech impediment.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, what are you here to do? And I said, I'm here to earn your investment business. He goes, how much? He goes, all of it. He goes, okay. I said, can you give me your statements? And I'll run it by our team. I'll come back to you. And I did. And then the next 3 years, I opened over 500 accounts doing that, and became one of the top producers at Merrill Lynch nationally for account opening. And then I left Merrill to go work for a company called Donaldson, Lufkin and Jenrette in San Francisco. And then I started working, calling on companies that were soon to go public, with the idea that when they went public, the founders would have a lot more capital. And I tried to assist them with banking or loans or maybe even a public offering.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm also in the finance world myself, and I always find it interesting because I love starting out in finance and just getting that background because I've heard other people tell me this before. It's like you need to understand enough to be the CFO of your company, right? And understand how these financial things work in your company. Because if you don't do that, you can find yourself in a black hole real quick. You can go down some steep slopes real quick, and you can find yourself in some really bad situations. So
That is so true. I actually cold called the founders of Home Depot. They lived in Atlanta, and I showed up at their business. And I didn't get, Arthur Blank or Bernie Marcus. So they were the top two. Bernard Marcus, I guess. Um, but I did get a guy. I won't say his name, but he was like right there with him,
yeah,
and he asked me questions. And I knew their inventory turn ratio. I knew how their end caps did. I knew their profit margin. I knew how they hired. And he's like, you know a lot about our company. I said, I've studied it, and I'm a shareholder. And he goes, well, if you do that kind of work, then I'm going to give you my business. And I did the same at Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola in Atlanta. And I focused on Atlanta corporations and began to open very large relationships through just taking the time, doing the work, and then showing up for meetings, even though they're unannounced. I was prepared.
yeah, yeah. It goes a long way. Like I said, if you can speak that language, it definitely helps you out in the long run. So what's interesting to me is that you said you were doing 400 cold calls a day with a stutter, with not a lot of success for like the majority of your early on career. And so I'm just curious, I mean, why did you not quit during that time period with, like you said,
Oh,
that
yeah,
schedule you're talking about
yeah,
sounds horrendous. Like what,
yeah. It was
why did you
terrible,
with that?
and
Yeah.
I hated. I hated it. It wasn't like it was like a fun thing for me, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I back in those days, they had something called a draw. I think they still do, which means they're advancing you money that you've yet to earn. And the idea is at some point you make money for the firm and you effectively pay it back, or you come off the draw. Coming off the draw would mean, that you either paid back or they forgive it. It's pretty common for them to forgive the money at some point. But
Yeah.
if you quit, you owe it back because they've made an investment in you
Okay.
and you didn't hold up your end of the bargain. So I'm like, getting fired was fine. You just don't owe it back. You're just no longer with Merrill Lynch.
Yeah.
But quitting was no bueno. So and I don't know if they would have come after me or not. They probably wouldn't have. In my mind's eye, I'm like, I can't afford to owe my salary back. And I just got to keep. You're going to have to fire me. I'm not going to quit. So that's kind of like the Navy SEAL mindset is, you can kick me out, but I will not stop.
Yeah.
And that's what ultimately, has been pretty consistent through my whole life. I don't quit. I still don't. But that really framed me, and I would not have that resolve if I did not have that difficulty. And
Mm.
some people say, "Man, I wish I had more difficult." We all have difficulties and limitations, whether your parents said you're stupid or you will never amount to anything, or you failed in relationships or marriages or businesses. There's always a new day and there's always a new opportunity. And as long as you don't quit, you keep pushing through. Sooner or later it'll work out for you.
Yeah. It's a good mindset to have. So you're absolutely crushing it at Merrill Lynch when you started out after you started doing door to door and you got a lot of accounts coming in. Then when did you decide to branch out and start your Weir Capital Management company?
Yeah, that was in 1998. I was going to, I wanted to run a hedge fund, which means you pretty sophisticated investment vehicle,
Yeah.
and you're going to basically buy companies you think that are going to do well and effectively sell or short companies you think they'll do poorly or less well. And I developed a strategy, and I was going to do that with a very well-known person. Now, that person left Merrill Lynch and then left, excuse me, DLJ. And I'm like, well, I still want to do that. And then they were not excited about me doing it without other partners. So at that point, I said, well, I've invested heavily in research and us building portfolios, at least theoretically, and I think this will work. So I said, I'm going to go on my own then, and I quit. So I just walked across the street, and then I learned about something called a non-compete clause. So, so
Yeah.
that allowed me to cold call again. So that's,
Oh, geez.
but it
Cold
was
calling.
I
Yeah.
started with zero revenue. Yeah, and at the end of the first year, we had this is a miracle. It took me 3 months to get the fund started. So between I think March 31st and the December 31st of 1999, my fund was up 130%. And that ended up being one of the top funds in the country. And that gave me notoriety and gave me some interviews and some newspapers and articles and some press that helped to really grow the firm. And the firm it grew after that.
Wow. So you said the first 3 months your fund was up 100.
The first 9 months. So I started in March of '99. That fund. I started the company January 11th, but in March the fund was open, and then I took in capital at that time, and then the next 9 months we had a very good return, most of which came in from November 15th to the end of the year. Substantially, the Nasdaq. There was a big fear at that time of what would happen when the year 2000 happened, when computers stopped, when all this
The
happened, and
time, yeah.
and I recognized that that would cause increased sales of semiconductors for like Qualcomm and companies like that. So I went heavily into those sort of companies, and as it worked out, those were excellent ideas, and those securities did very well during that period of time. So the majority of our return happened the last 6 weeks of the year.
Wow. That's impressive. So like you said, you started out cold calling to get investors into your fund, and then 9 months later with all new investors, you're up 130%, which is incredible returns for 9
Oh, it
months.
was great. Yeah, it was less successful the next 2 years because I
Yeah.
didn't understand hedging as well as I thought I did. So I didn't make the headlines for Top Fund 2000 2001, but it was a great start. And then and we ended up growing the business over time and developing key relationships, and it all came from that and an effort, getting yourself out there every day. And I think when you're growing a business, it's easy to be in the business and not on the business. And when you're an entrepreneur, that's a big crossover to make, is going from working in the business sort of as the efficient employee number one to being on the business where you're thinking more strategically and less tactically.
Yeah.
So for me, the move to strategy from just tactics uh, made the biggest difference in growth and allowed me to get into various business ventures, as you've mentioned.
That's awesome. So I want to ask you more specifically, how did you make that switch from being in the business to kind of on the business? Because like you're talking about, I was speaking to a couple entrepreneurs not too long ago, and one of the things that they told me is that they spend a lot of their time really just reacting to what's going on instead of being able to
Uh,
progressively think about how to plan for the next couple of years. And I mean, I'm sure life gets so busy for a lot of these people, and next thing you know, you're just working your business, and you're just reacting, right? So how do you break that cycle?
Yeah, and to say that I've totally mastered it would not be accurate. So, but to say that I seek to master it every day would be accurate. So, what I learned from it's another person named Brian Tracy, and he's a very well known speaker. I think he's in his late 70s, early 80s now. But I hired him as a personal coach in 2000 2001, and then I would go as part of a group, maybe 20 people, and spend time with him. But what he would underscore is that you have to look at where you get your most return. And it's something called the Pareto principle. And it's basically 80% of your impact will come from 20% of your effort. And 80% of your problems also come from 20% of the people you work with. That's pretty much, holds true. Maybe it's 76, maybe it's 85, but
Sure.
in ballpark terms, that's correct. So what I realized with much evaluation was I need to hire people to do the things that I'm less good at or less profitable for me. And as I did that, I experienced a lot of growth. Now, entrepreneur, the fear is I can't afford to pay this person 60,000 or 100,000 a year, because in your mind you're thinking you're paying them out of your pocket like you have a hobby or a racehorse that costs that much, or a mortgage on a second home. But it's not like that. You're investing in a person, and you need to look at all employee investments that they either lever your time or they create revenue that is equal to three times what you pay them. So they're paying somebody 60,000, they need to deliver 180,000 of benefit there. And then you seek to do is align interest where the more productive they are for you, then the more compensation that they can have.
Like a profit sharing type of arrangement.
Yeah, 100%. And you'll find when you align interest, people have different amount of conviction and resolve, and they feel like an owner, and less like somebody who has to be somewhere for 8 or 9 hours a day.
Right, right. So on that note, I mean, for like you're talking about, for all these new entrepreneurs that are trying to hire people, but they don't really have that cash to say, okay, I have enough cash to pay them a full salary for a year. Is it smart in that situation to go out and loan money from someone else or loan money from a bank to be able to pay that employee out of the gate? Or do you think that's a not the first wise financial step you should be taking as an entrepreneur?
It's an individual business risk.
Yeah.
I have borrowed money to grow a business before. More often than not, I've chosen not to. So typically, is figure then I it all prove at least break even over some period of time, 90 days, 60 days, 180 days, then I would just move on. So you have to look at it. And I heard somebody say, uh, you're think of business more like a sports team and less like a family, meaning that you want to have the best people in the seats um, as long as you can. And if they're not the best people, sometimes that changes. And how that really shows up is if you start a business, let's say that like Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook. It's remarkable that he can go from a dorm room to being one of the largest companies and still be the CEO, right? But that's unusual. Most people who would have joined him at the time may have a skill set that takes them to a point, but not further. So what I would suggest to people is evaluate your business, and sometimes the business practice you held, the product you held, and even the people who've helped you get there might not be the people to go to the next phase. But it doesn't mean they didn't create value. It doesn't mean maybe they can be repurposed or in your company, but they might not be the people to go to the next phase.
Yeah. You got to constantly be evaluating that, just like you're talking about. Um,
Mhm. And the same thing with business units. Some businesses you need to close down, some you need to double down on, and it's very easy to lose sight of that. And again, to say I've done that perfectly would also not be accurate. But I seek to do that, and I always seek to work with people to find something else that they can do inside the organization that may fit their skill level.
yeah.
But if you think about technology, particularly AI today, and how things are changing, you know, people run the risk of becoming a human fax machine, meaning the fax machine was an amazing technology in the 70s and 80s. It was so efficient to move documents and to be convenient and to get things done. But if you're still using a fax machine as your main form of communication in 2025, you've been lapped, 100 times over. So even if you're an employee or an owner of a business, you need to constantly be working on your skill set so you don't become the next fax machine.
Right. And leverage new technology like AI. Yeah. And that could be every
100%.
person, that could be an employee right there, leveraging AI the right way.
Yeah, I do think in the next 5 years you'll have a company that goes to $1 billion of value with one person who really understands AI, scaling, building funnels, and outsourcing that we haven't seen before or really had the tools to do until now.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely interested to see what's going on in the next few years, what's coming up.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
So I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they understand that you got to make upfront revenue somehow and take that revenue stream and maybe go out there and start investing, start a business and keep growing in that realm. So you become more
Mhm.
passively as an investor over time, kind of what you were doing in real estate, media, film, Topgolf, all these other business interests. How do you become that passive investor? And a lot of business owners get stuck in that first revenue stage of their company, trying to make it work, trying to make it work. And obviously, you've coached a lot of entrepreneurs, you've done a lot of speaking, you've seen a lot of entrepreneurs' journeys. I mean, what are some of the main tips that you would say to just an entrepreneur to help them kind of break out of that first revenue stage and just scale their company to where it needs to go?
What I would encourage them to think about is take a break, get away from the business because it can really consume you, and think about what can you do if you didn't have your own self-perceived limits. The biggest limit people have is capital. They say, I don't have the money to hire somebody or to grow the business. Another may say, I don't have the expertise. Another may say, I don't have the ability to structure or organize something. What I suggest is get to clarity of where you want to go first. And with clarity, you can attract capital, talent, and people to accomplish just about anything. I'll give you an example. Sir Richard Branson, I was fortunate enough to spend some time with him a month ago. And when he started Virgin Airlines, he didn't have a $1 billion budget. If you were to start an airline, you may think, I need to spend $1 billion, I need to buy these airplanes, I need to go lease these long-term leases at airports and get facilities. What he did is called Boeing, is like, hey, do you have an extra airplane? No, we don't. And he just bugged them until they said, yeah, you have one. And he leased it for a couple 100,000 a month. And then what he did is he launched it with the marketing and then realized that people would buy tickets before they actually flew. And then he could order fuel and would have to pay for the fuel 30 days after he flew. So basically, he got paid before he flew on the tickets, and he would pay his largest expense, which was fuel, after he'd already completed the flight. So he was able to use that to get started. So there's ways to structure things that might be outside the box. So if you don't have the capital, you have to be more creative on structuring than if you do have the capital. Capital solves a lot of problems, but also creates a lot of problems because it can make you become lazy. Because if you have enough capital, you can hire 20 people. You don't even have to be that particular. But that might be a mistake. And if you're capital constrained, like most startups are, most entrepreneurs are, a little creativity can go a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very well said. And it's all about limiting those limitations that people think they have about themselves early on. And like you're talking about, be creative about it. And there's always a way to make something happen, so you just got to find what that avenue is or what that corner is.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So talk to me about your book, Who's Eating Your Pie? What kind of inspired you to make that book? And what do you hope to get out of that if they read your book?
Yeah, yeah. I wrote it during COVID, and my catalyst was, and I played around with the idea of writing a book for a decade and had written chapters that really weren't organized. And when I had the time at home, I'm like, I want to write something because people seem detached. They seem hopeless. The original headlines were 20% of the world would die from COVID. And they were pretty scared. They're really fearful. And fear is a terrible thing. It can be paralyzing. So I wanted to write a book that would give people the opportunity to reframe any problem, that could do a real analysis of where they are. Once they do that, a real analysis of where they want to go, and then give them simple tools that have been used by hundreds or thousands of people to get from where they are to where they want to go. And my first chapter is called Permission to Dream, because if you talk to a kid who's 5 years old, he's going to fly rockets, he'll be an airline pilot, he'll all these amazing things. And when they're 18, ready to go to college, hey, I just want to get into the whatever school let me go to. You get out of college, hey, I just want to get a job. But the dreams almost they stop.
Yeah.
And what I want to take a step back is take a step back. You have one life. If what would you dare to do if you were not bound by your self perceived limitations? And start there, and then build it backward. Like, if I had the capital, if I had the expertise, what would I do? And then if you can get the clarity and enough business resolve and strategic thinking, you will attract the capital and the people to accomplish your goals.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's such a great motto. And like you said, I mean, fear is definitely a paralyzing factor. And I just graduated college 2 years ago, and I can definitely relate to what you're talking about. You grow up and you have these huge dreams of what you really want to do, and then you go to college, and then life really starts to get busy. And next thing you know, you're tied down to a 9 to 5 job that you don't really care about, and then you wake up 20 years later and you're still at that job. And so it's
Yeah,
it's you got to be willing to embrace that fear and take a risk and make that jump, at some point, because like you said, it's your one life. And so
it is. It is. And if you want to get, when people are in their 40s, they just kind of just want a hot meal. So there's a point somewhere in the line where you're like, "Man, this is complicated. I want to put in my time and retire somewhere." But it's if you just have to arrest that thinking, and then what would I do if I allowed myself to dream? And the reason people don't want to do that is they're afraid to fail. What if I what if I dream and I don't make it? And the bigger fear to me is, what if I never tried? Do I want to be the guy who's 65 years old, who's at a retirement community, or 80 years old, saying, if only I tried this? Very few people have regrets about failure. That didn't work out. They'll say, at least I tried. The larger regrets in older people are things they never did. Like, now I'm in a wheelchair and I never went to London. I never went to Paris. I've never seen the pyramids. I've never done these things. And there's never a convenient time to do anything. So you have to choose to live life daily.
yeah, yep, and make it happen. I mean, that's really the bottom line. And yeah, that's so good. And one of the things that I took away from the conference that you spoke at is the fact that God was really the first entrepreneur, right? He was the one that first created, right, the earth, the heavens, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's extremely crucial as well, because God put that inside of all of us to go out there and build something, create something, and impact others and go a long way. So
Yeah, it says in Genesis that we're created in His image, and in His image is creativity, and so I think that's something that we forget, and we're creative and we beat it down, or we're conditioned to beat it down, or to
yeah,
be super aware of risk. But
yeah,
there's risk of doing, there's risk of not doing.
yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of Christian entrepreneurs listening to this podcast as well. And one of the things I always like to ask successful entrepreneurs is really, how do you factor in God into your company? Like, what are you doing specifically to have like a faith aspect of your company? I mean, is it setting up like a donor advised fund and setting aside a certain
Mhm.
amount of funds to go in there and distributing out
Mhm.
to charities at that point? Or I'm just curious, do you
Mhm.
have any strategies on that?
So I started off just doing everything individually. So I've always given to charities individually, or churches have done mission trips and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And then I began to open company meetings in prayer. So we have Monday morning meetings. We always open in prayer. And then I've held Bible studies at my office historically as well. And one of the things that I'm doing today that I've not done, I'm just now launching new businesses again, and I'm reframing them where I'm going to make it public that we give 10% of our operating profits to charities. If
Mm.
it's single moms in your area or whatever charity may appeal to you or those you represent, it's very powerful. And when you give away and you're generous, something happens magical. It's like money becomes easier. It also becomes less of a god to you because you don't view it as finite, you view it as infinite. And you also don't view it as all for you, it's for others. And that's a very big motivating factor. Like knowing if you do a little extra effort, maybe a single mom gets a set of tires this month that she wouldn't have had otherwise. So trying to position yourself to do that and to have money become a tool instead of a master is a very, very powerful position. One of the most successful entrepreneurs I know who now gives away over $1 billion a year
Wow.
started off by giving away 5% of corporate profits, then 10, then 15. And over 20 years, he gives away half of corporate profits now. And it's a private company, he owns the whole thing. But what he's found is every 3 years, his revenue and profits grow so substantially that he would be where he is 3 years down if he kept 100%. He's just twice as big every 3 years. He's maintained a growth rate where they double profits, and they've done it now for 30 years, every 3 years.
Wow. That's so impressive. God definitely works in mysterious ways, right? So,
Yeah, and he just and he's closed on Sundays. So it's interesting to see uh, how biblical principles that we all, hey, this is a good idea. I aspire to do that. Give it a whirl and try it. And there are people who are not people of faith. They're people that are very good people and they believe in giving back. They give back and have a result that's very similar.
yeah. And I've heard so many stories like that too, where you really don't feel like you have money to give away, and then you give away that money, and then boom, you find yourself making that back plus so much, right?
It
And
is so. It's the only thing in Scripture that God says to test them. Test me on this. It's the only thing He says that to test and to see if His word's not true. But it's there's so many other things, not just monetary, that come out of it. Because if you're writing a check to help somebody, those are the best checks you ever write. And then if you're looking, hey, do I want to get an Armani suitcase, or do I want to give away $1,000 to somebody that changes their life? It does. And there are people, I have friends of mine that keep 10,000 in cash on them, and they try to give away $100 or $200 a day to people who are not in a tip industry. So if they're at the airport and someone is sweeping the floor, they'll just hand them $100 bill and say thank you. More than 20% of the time, those people stop, and oftentimes they're moved emotionally because that $100 means so much to them that it impacts their life. And they don't, and maybe they're people of faith and are God help me. And sometimes that answer is $100 is an answer of prayer to them. So
yeah,
allowing yourself to be used financially to benefit others is of tremendous value.
absolutely. And it definitely puts things in perspective too. I think so many people see these guys online that, driving the nice cars and how many millions net worth. In reality, like that's the top 1% of the top 1%, right? Even if they are real. And so it like
Mhm.
really puts things in perspective, like how far, $100 could go for someone, like you said, new tires for a mom, or something like that. So it's
It's
definitely,
huge. It's huge. And it's so easy to lose touch with that. And even in America, even the ones of us that are struggling right now, if you have a global perspective, we're still wildly blessed in comparison to the great majority of the world.
yeah, yeah, no doubt. And that's just important to keep in mind, right? Have that gratitude. Um,
Oh, and it's difficult. It's easy to forget. So giving continually is a reminder.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you're blessed enough to have certain problems, right? That other people wouldn't even have. So that's a cool way.
Yeah, yeah. And if you don't have money, one thing I did one year is at Christmas, I worked at a shelter and just sort of clothes. And people were bringing by clothing. I brought by coats I wasn't wearing. And in the wintertime, you don't think about it, but I may have, collected a fair number of coats or people giving me gifts. I'm not going to wear them all this winter, maybe ever again, right? You take them to a shelter and somebody who needs a coat, wow, that's a big deal. So you can give non-monetary gifts if you're tight, and give something that would help somebody else. And what's really cool is if you volunteer your time, you have a connectivity to charity that you don't have by writing a check.
Mm, yep. You still impact a lot of lives, just by giving.
100%, 100%.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you jumping on today and sharing all the stories and a lot of great tips and strategies. And I'm sure people have some great takeaways. But before we hop off, I've got a few more questions for you. So the first one is, where can people go to reach out to you if they want to reach out to you? And is there anything else that you would like to say, to any of these people listening to the podcast?
No, yeah, yeah. So on Instagram, you can find me at Erik Weir, ErikWeir, or you can go to ericweir.com and you can download a chapter of my book or shoot me a message on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you, and I answer everyone who reaches out.
Awesome. All right, guys, there you have it. Erik Weir, thank you so much for joining me today.
Grace, my pleasure. Thank you.